People don't understand that one of the biggest wealth pillars in the United States is the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Compared to other countries, how they do debt, it is a lot way more stable here in America than it is other countries, believe it or not. So understanding how to take the power of debt, because if I can lock in a 4 or 5% interest rate and pay that same monthly payment over for 30 years, the money that I'm paying them back in year 30 is not worth the same amount of money that I borrowed in year 1, and really take advantage of inflation. The two biggest killers of wealth right now are taxes and inflation. Welcome back, everyone, to the Tax-Free Wealth Podcast. I'm here with Megan from Neo Home Loans, helping real estate investors get their first, second, or third rental properties. Megan, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's awesome over here. The Chicago weather is good. I don't know. It's not like sunny California and you get nice.
I know. We actually had a heat wave, so it's finally back to its normal 75. Perfect weather.
I had a question. So what do you see are some of the biggest roadblocks or obstacles for investors or people that want to be a real estate investor getting their first property?
I know a lot of people want to be investors, but they don't own their primary yet. So I think that's one hard thing. It's hard to get an investment property without a primary, and a lot of times they're wanting to go out of state for something cheaper. But so that's like one roadblock. I'd say people don't want to, or they want the sexy investment like the Airbnb or something in California, but aren't willing to kind of take the stepping stones to get to.
We'll back up and go back to your introduction, your information, but why do you say it's harder for somebody to buy a property without first having their primary home?
A lot of the lenders that I work with that we send our loans to for things like that are going to be a little bit stricter. One, because you don't have the history of owning a home before. That's the main thing I'd say. But I think being able to build up to that is going to be a little bit better for most.
So it's always better to have a primary home loan, maybe FHA or conventional, and then go and get an investment property loan?
That's what I think. And I can kind of tell you how I got into it, but I used my primary homes as a stepping stone to get into the investments, or using that as a vehicle, living in it for a couple of years, doing the house hacking and moving up that way, versus saving up that 20% down that you're going to necessarily usually need for an investment property as well.
Well, they have to, in California, you almost have to like owner occupy, right? Or use a low money down loan, right?
I don't know. I'm also like a big proponent of putting as less down as possible and leveraging more, because cash is king, right? You want to be able to do that. So putting all your assets into that house as your down payment is not always the most beneficial, I'd say.
I have a similar thought, except when the interest rates are super, super high. So like, for example, when Airbnbs became really popular in 2020 or 2021, you could really put down 10% down or owner occupy, and you would capsule a lot of money based on how much you put down because of the interest rate. But now that same deal at a 7% interest rate as opposed to a 4%, it's not going to cash flow as much. And so I think it's very deal specific based on whether or not you put 10 or 20% down, but also thinking about your exit plan too. So there's a lot of investors who they think they're going to buy a property and they don't hold on to it for the 30 years or forever that they think. That's why the average person only keeps a mortgage for 7 years. But in a scenario where you're selling a property in less than 3 years or 5 years, let's just say you have a 5-year time horizon where you're going to buy a property, fix it up, start renting it out, and sell it within 5 years. If you do a 10% down loan, you may not even build up that much equity compared to if you would have put 20% down. You would have come out more ahead within 5 years. In some cases, right? But
a lot of people don't think about that at all to exit out it.
Well, I'm just really nerdy and I love math and science and numbers. But looking at it from a pure cash flow perspective, it's like, okay, yeah, you can put the least amount of money down, but I would first try to figure out what your strategy is, because if you're gonna buy and hold, and that's gonna be your forever home, then okay, fine, it'll be paid off in 30 years. But if there's a good chance that you sell that and try to redeploy capital, maybe you do want to think about putting more down so that you have more equity after those 5 years. Because arguably, if you have a 3.5% down payment, like you're not going to have any equity after 5 years unless it's just massive forced appreciation.
Which we have seen, I guess, in California right now in the past 4 or 5 years, I'd say. Actually, let me ask you this, Ryan, because I hear this a lot from people asking me. A lot of people want to cash out refinance and take that equity out to do something else with. Are there any implications from your side on that, or?
Yeah. So from a tax perspective, you don't pay taxes when you refinance, right? You ultimately defer the tax bill until you sell the property. So you bought a property for $100K, put for $200 in, now it's worth $500 and you borrowed money out. You don't pay the taxes on that until you actually sell the property or you start generating income.
Oh, are any implications on that? Because a lot of people are like, oh, when do I just cash out refi and I don't have to pay taxes on it? So anything that they would need to think about on that aspect.
So very similar conversation. If you keep adding value and refining, the only equity that you're having in these properties is whatever the natural appreciation is. You're not actually getting as much value out of equity pay down. The first thing I'm going to look at before somebody goes to refinance a property, like say you have an investment property, is what's the current cash flow right now? And then what is the cash flow going to be after the added interest? Because you could pull $100K out of the property, but then that's going to cost you an extra $5,000 a year just in interest alone, which is cool if the property is cash flowing $30K. So now you're netting 25 and then you just borrow that other 100 out, right? To go on to the next property. But I would first, if the deal's not cash flowing, there's no way you can borrow against it because you'll be in even more negative cash flow. And so it's almost where I see investors kind of go wrong is they're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So they'll have a deal where they're not cash flowing a lot, and then they borrow against the appreciate because it went up in value. Well, now they have a higher interest expense, which is fine if you can make enough money to pay it off. But then that kind of goes into what I talk about a little bit about return on hassle, where if you put $100,000 in front of me and you say, what are you going to do with it? The first thing I want to look at is, well, what am I paying right now in debt? If I got a 9% loan, if I have a 9% rate on a HELOC or a loan, I'm better off maybe just paying that down versus taking that $100K, trying to go make 20% and then paying off the 9%. Even though somebody could tell, hey, if you can make 20% and you pay off 9%, you make money. It doesn't factor in my time involvement. The time that's involved in doing that. And so realistically, I need to earn like 30 or 40% on my money for that to be what I do instead of paying off my 9% note. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people don't or underestimate the time too if they have a full-time job and then want to be an investor on the side.
Well, and a lot of investors, the problem is a lot of these templates that people give out, are just cash on cash, and they're very short-term numbers. When a real good investment decision, it should be, hey, where's my equity position after 5 years, after 10 years? If I wanted to factor in, hey, I'm buying a property right now in 2024 and the interest rate's 7%, and here's my cash flow per month. Well, what happens if it goes down to 5.5% or 5% and I could refi? Like, there's so much more to it than just money in and then money out. People are not factoring in equity pay down, appreciation, tax benefits. These are all benefits that real estate investors have that, sure, the cash flow is great and realistically the cash flow is going to get you out of your W-2 job, but the real big wealth pillars, that long-term money, that's appreciation, that's loan pay down, and those are tax benefits.
What do you think the biggest tax benefit would be for people to invest in real estate, or I guess even buy their first house first, right? Is that a better?
Yeah, even like your first primary home. So for example, they call it the Section 121 rule. I call it the homeowner's rule. Basically, if you live in a property for at least 2 years, you can sell it up to $250K if you're married, $250K if you're single, and $500,000 if you're married, and those are tax free. The only people that I've ever seen sell a primary home for a bigger gain is people that live in California, or that town in Georgia where the golf course is at. That's the only people that I've seen sell their primary and end up paying taxes on it, because this is a really favorable rule. So if I'm married and I bought a $500,000 property and I live in it for, let's say, 3 or 4 years, and then I sell it for $1 million, that entire $1 million is tax free. Okay.
Yeah.
And I don't have to do anything with the money. I don't have to redeploy it into another property. I could sit on my hands and let it sit in a bank account. Now, another strategy, because what a lot of people will do is they'll have their primary home, they'll live in it for a couple of years, and then they'll want to move out of it and make it a rental. Well, what you have to be careful about is that rule is a 2 out of 5 year rule. So if I live in a property for 2 years and then I rent it for longer than 3 years, 2 out of the last 5 years, I lose that benefit. Okay. So
Unless you
you're
move
going to
back
be,
to it, right?
yeah. And then you have to move back into it longer, right?
Yeah.
So if that's you and you're debating like, okay, because a lot of times recently I've found that investors are better off selling their primary home, taking advantage of the exclusion, and instead of renting that property out and earning whatever per month, they're better off taking all that equity tax-free and buying something bigger that's going to make them more money.
Yeah, that's actually something I've been thinking about a lot lately and trying to educate people on, because maybe it doesn't make sense to keep your house for another year or two. Maybe it just makes more sense now if it's going to, you have your amount you can shelter, you already made that $250 gain. Making another 50 grand more is not going to, you're going to pay taxes on that difference. So maybe it makes more sense to sell sooner. I'm doing that with that personally too. So I'm like, I'm right at that 250 mark. Should I go and sell it?
Yeah. It's also really about knowing what your market and the local environment. So for example, if you know there's just a huge supply shortage of homes in that area and stuff's probably going to go up and they're not building anytime soon, then you hold on to it knowing that price is going to rise, but you're also fighting against interest rates at the same time. Typically for every 1% that the interest rates go up or down, another 4 million people can afford to buy a home or not buy a home. Every 1% the interest rate goes up, 8% purchase price swing, right? And so maybe that's how our numbers are off. But if it all depends on the position that you're in. You know, if I'm in a position where I rent that property out, but I'm losing money every month, well, I'm going to be more inclined to sell it and get rid of it than wait on it to wait for the interest rates to go down or wait for that home to go up in value. I'd rather just sell it and walk away. But if the property is cash flowing and I'm okay, then I'll just hold on to it and wait for the rates to come down. But I would never want to rent it out longer than that 3-year period because then I would lose out on the exclusion.
Or should I just wait and hold on to it till I get married and then I can take more?
What's so fun with tax strategy, you guys should go check out my podcast and all the videos, but you can make an extra $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 a year without any work just by learning the strategies that you have available to you. It's so crazy that our school system doesn't teach tax strategy or like, how do you save money on taxes? They just teach you to be, a W-2 employee and pay money in the system forever, but nobody's there teaching you strategies on how to save money.
Do you think that on the same note, so I think I was talking to some real estate agents about this the other day and a financial advisor, but do you think there is going to be any sort of legislation that would change, like especially around that homeowner's exemption, like to get more inventory into the market? Someone had mentioned that they might be increasing that from 250 to maybe 300 or 500 to 750.
That's definitely a lever they can pull. And it's probably a better lever to pull than to give first-time home buyer credit because it's like one or the other. I think the upping the exclusion on the sale will provide more supply because giving people more first-time home buyer credit, it doesn't fix the supply side of like, hey, we don't have enough homes and there's certainly not a lot of people looking to get rid of their homes because if I live in a primary residence and I refi during COVID and I'm sitting at a 4% rate and I got $600,000-$700,000 of equity in there, even if the government raised it, am I still going to get rid of the house? Because then I got to go buy something at a 7% rate right now or 6% rate. So
I think it'll be interesting to see what will happen after November with all this.
Yeah, and that's what's so cool about tax policy is the government incentivizes certain behavior based on the policies that they write. So historically, you could tell that they incentivize real estate investing, they incentivize oil and gas, and they incentivize new energy. That's why everybody that buys a Tesla is getting a credit. Yeah, so that you could tell what they incentivize, and that also tells you where you put your money at. Because if the government's incentivizing real estate investments, clean energy, like that's where I want to put my money because I know I'll save the most amount of money in taxes on it.
Are there any other things kind of in that aspect that you think people should be looking at that they might not know about besides that?
People don't understand that one of the biggest wealth pillars in the United States is the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Compared to other countries, how they do debt, it is way more stable here in America than it is other countries, believe it or not. So understanding how to take a power of debt, because if I can lock in a 4 or 5% interest rate and pay that same monthly payment over for 30 years, the money that I'm paying them back in year 30 is not worth the same amount of money that I borrow in year 1. And just learning how to use and really take advantage of inflation. The two biggest killers of wealth right now are taxes and inflation. So
Yeah.
if you, number one, taxes. So if I get $100,000 check from a sale of a property, I'm going to pay taxes on that. So I'm going to be left with like $70,000. And then that 70K is going to sit in a bank account and lose value because of inflation. So then after a year, that 70K is really only worth 65K.
So dollar today is never going to be worth as much as it is today.
That's right. Yeah.
There's a term that, I heard recently. I've been just trying to use it a little bit more. It's inflation-induced debt destruction. So kind of like what you were saying, really utilizing that 30-year mortgage. All of my rates right now I have are 2.75, 2.99, 3.2. I think my highest one is 3.5. So inflation is definitely going up higher than that.
You're killing. Because the money that you're paying back is worth so much less than when you borrowed it. Like it's the only place where you can pay back less than what you originally borrowed.
Mm-hmm.
Normally,
do you think that's still the case now with higher rates too?
It depends. Like historical inflation's at 3 to 4%. That's what the government tells us, 4 to 5%. But some items are inflating at way higher than others, like milk, oil, gas, eggs. Basically, everything that the average American needs to live is going to value. But I still believe if you can get at a good rate and it's cash flowing, that's an asset class, or that's an asset vehicle, and you can always refinance later if the rate goes down. But I would never I would never tell somebody to buy an investment property right now that doesn't cash flow right now.
On that note, you were saying you would not advise someone to buy an investment property right now if it's not cash flowing. Would you advise people to buy an investment property before a primary? Like kind of circling back to what we talked about before, or do you think that tax-wise?
I think I have the same advice that you do. I think you should lock in your homestead, your 30-year fixed rate mortgage. That should probably be no more than 33 to 35% of your take-home pay. I still believe you want to lock in that fixed rate mortgage, and then you go to buy your investment property after. But I mean, the best thing, and that's how I bought my first house, is just house hacking, right? Everybody says it, but it really is a pretty big wealth building tool. And it's the only way you can own a 4-unit property without having to put 20% down or something more. And I know they've kind of fixed the rules recently, but I still think, the first investment should be your primary, no more than 33% of your take-home pay to that, and then you start buying investment property.
Yeah, that's good advice, because you can actually buy with going over 33, which is kind of crazy. I think the lending laws are definitely very lenient on what you can get.
It depends on what loan, right? Because doesn't even FHA go all the way up to 50%?
Mm-hmm. I've done a couple of VA loans too that went up to 60, which is kind of crazy. And I typically like to advise people, like, I don't feel comfortable putting you in this loan. But a lot of the cases like that, I had a few military clients that they're just going to rent the rooms out. So it's like, we can't use that as income to help offset it, but that's another great investment.
They're not able to use the room rent?
Not room. Yeah, they call that border income.
Oh, they can't use the room.
Like the room. So if you have a 4-bedroom house, well, you can only use it if it's like an actual separate unit to qualify. Now, I know being his advisor, I'm like, okay, I will be willing to do this loan for you and push you to kind of to that limit, because I know you're going to be getting some extra income that I can't count in that debt ratio for you.
And then what are they, if it was a separate unit, what are they able to use to qualify to help them?
So 75% of the market rent. So what they'll typically do is when we do the appraisal, we'll order a rent schedule, and they'll take kind of comparable rentals as well. So it's pretty conservative, I say, because you're still taking that 25% for vacancies, maintenance, and all that. But it's helpful for people. So if you were buying like a 4-unit that felt like you were kind of pushing your limit, you can use those other 3 units as income.
Are you familiar with the there's like a cap on the total amount of VA loans that you can have at a time. Do you know how that works?
Yeah, so I actually ran into this recently and I learned something new. There's not necessarily a cap on how many you can have. It just depends on your eligibility and your entitlement. So if you bought a primary home with your VA loan, and then you want to buy another primary home, maybe in other states it might work because the price points are lower. But in California, where I'm at right now, you're going to have to get out of that VA loan first or sell that property to restate your entitlement. What I just learned recently was you can only do that one time because your VA loan is actually meant to be owner occupied. So if you bought it with your VA loan and wanted to change it to a conventional loan and then buy something else, you can only reinstate that. If you want to keep the property, you can only reinstate it one time. They don't want people to use the vehicle. Mm-hmm.
In your lifetime? Wow.
So, but you can sell your property and then you can get it back and you can do it. But if you're using your VA loan as a vehicle to like get multiple properties over and over again that you're turning into investments, that's, I think, the reasoning behind it.
So the entitlement, isn't it based on a city or what state you live in? Or how does that work?
The more costly areas, you can go up higher. If you have your full entitlement, there's technically no limit as long as you can qualify for it. However, if you have multiple VA loans out at once, then you're going to be limited on the cap of the city.
And the entitlement, it doesn't matter who you are. It's just that location, or is your entitlement like based on your pay, or how does that work?
No, anyone's eligible for it, unless you get discharged dishonorably, then you don't. Or if you've had your VA loan and you were a short sale back in the day. So I saw a lot of that back when I kind of first started in the business, when there were a lot of short sales going on. So you lose a portion of it. That just means you can still use your VA loan. You just have to come in with a little bit more down or a portion of that to help guarantee it as well. But yeah, VA loans are probably an amazing vehicle to get into homeownership. Especially you can get 4-unit with 0 down.
4-unit, 0 down, live in one. Do you see, because I know over here, my first investment, I think it was a duplex. I lived in one side, rented out the other. And at the end of the day, I was paying $400 a month to live on my own. I didn't get it fully covered, but I was only spending $400, which was a lot cheaper than what some of my friends were paying rent on. I mean, some of my friends were paying $1,700, $1,600 a month in rent.
Mm-hmm.
But over where you're at, a 4-unit, let's say even if you are 0% down, so your freaking PMI and your PITI is maxed out, are you living for free because of the other 3 units in most cases?
You probably weren't living for free, but you're living, I'd say you're definitely paying maybe below market rent or at market rent. Yeah, you won't have PMI if it's the 0 down VA loan, but you can do this with a conventional loan, 5% down, FHA 3.5. The rents, the prices in this area are higher, but the rents are there too. I've noticed this with some of my tenants in my multifamily units. I've invested more in kind of the maybe not so nice areas of San Diego. So the prices are a little bit lower, but the rents are still there. And you get these tenants that are more afraid of losing the housing and leaving than caring about not making the rent payments. So you have these longer term tenants, but yeah, it's not the nicest area. You might not want to live there. It's not sexy. Maybe live there a couple of years, but then you move out and you get rent for it.
Does the VA follow similar home inspection than FHA, or?
Yeah, VA and FHA are pretty much the same as far as I'd say requirements. Conventional, definitely you can get away with a little bit more, but it's really a protection for the buyer, right? They want to make sure there's no safety or health issues. Has to be habitable. It's the government's way of protecting you because it's a government-backed loan and just making sure that there's nothing majorly wrong with it. I mean, yeah, you can buy something pretty crappy and it's probably not nice, but you can still find it.
Yeah, and oftentimes like you're getting the seller to either fix them or give you, well, now in the FHA or VA, you can't get it fixed after the fact, or how does that work? Because I bought a house on FHA, needed a new roof.
Yeah, it depends if they call it out, if it's like really apparent. If it's like you can definitely tell that the roof needs to be replaced and that it's like leaking and there are like giant like issues with mold or like the ceiling's falling down, yeah, you're gonna have to get that fixed. But if it's just it needs to be replaced, it's old, you'll be fine. So more so visually. But you can also, there's certain things, if they're small things, you can also do what we call an escrow holdback, and they can hold back that money from the seller and fix it if you need to close right away. But I don't know. Right now, in where I'm at in San Diego, we're seeing it being more of a buyer's market right now in certain areas or certain places, so you can get the seller to do a lot of things for you. Or
What did you do before you were in the lending business?
this is all I've ever done.
Oh.
I started right out of college. Yeah, 21 years old. I looked like I was 15 years old, but yes, just selling mortgages, and I'm still here today. That was 12 years ago.
So when you started when did you buy? So between when you started in the business, when did you buy your first investment property?
So I bought my first primary first, which is now an investment property, but I bought it 2 years later. And I probably wouldn't have been able to do that if I wasn't in this industry. I wouldn't have learned what I learned from doing mortgages to be able to get into something. It's kind of, I tell people a story sometimes too. It's my grandpa would never give us Christmas presents when we were little. We came from a pretty, I'd say, working class family, but he would always give us a Fidelity envelope in our stocking every year. And when I was 24, he passed away. When you're a kid, you're like, this is just a piece of paper. What is this? But instead, he was like putting a little bit of money away in this investment account. So I was 24 years old when he passed away. That was 2 years in the business. And I was like, what am I going to do with 20 grand? Buy a new car. Like most of my friends are just going to spend it or go out. I put that down on my first house. And then, so it was 20 grand. The house was $442,000. It was a 4-bedroom house. It had to be a 4-bedroom because otherwise I couldn't afford the mortgage if I only had 3 bedrooms. So I was counting on the rent. I had to have my dad co-sign for me, but kind of like you, my rent was $800 maybe. And I rented out the rooms.
What's that home worth now?
I just saw one that sold for 1.2, but mine has an ADU on it. So I'm thinking maybe like closer to 1.5. I don't know. Yeah, that was the vehicle I used to kind of build my real estate portfolio. Like I said, leveraging that all from that $20,000, taking equity out, doing a HELOC, remodeling it, building that ADU. It had an enclosed patio. So now I'm getting an extra $2,800 on that second unit. So,
but the Cliff Notes version is you put 20 grand down, and that turned into $1 million of equity. Did I get that right?
Yeah, but it actually turned into more because I used that 20 grand and I have used that house, my first house I ever bought, to buy every other house I own. So I've done that 5 more times. I just put some equity out. So yeah, I mean, 20 grand turned into more than I could have probably ever saved up for sure by using real estate as a vehicle. So
that's awesome.
But it definitely was a sacrifice then. You're renting out your bedrooms. You're saving up as much money as you can at that time. But that's something that people don't think about.
Were you on rice and beans? Beans are nice.
Top ramen, Coors Lights only, or bag wine. I don't know.
What? I can get down with that.
Me too.
Where can listeners of the podcast find you?
You can find me on Instagram. It's probably where I'm the most active on. It's just at meg.sawamura.
We can link it in the show notes.
Yeah, I can put the link down there. But yeah, I've loved chatting about this stuff, and I love tax planning too. So yeah, thank you for having me, Ryan.